Muchas gracias a cada uno de ustedes por venir. Es una ocasión muy especial para el Centro de Estudios para el Desarrollo contar con la presencia de la profesora Deirdre Mc Closkey por primera vez en Uruguay. Y ahora, para que entienda un poco lo que estamos hablando, voy a cambiar a inglés. Luego ella va a dar una charla aproximadamente de 30 minutos. Después yo le voy a hacer alguna pregunta y la idea después también es abrir un poco a que ustedes puedan hacerle alguna pregunta. So, thank you, Deirdre, very much for being here in Uruguay for the first time. I hope that you enjoy our country.
I already have.
It's really an honor for us having you. For me, that I admire very much your work, and it was very important for understand the importance of culture and the very profound importance of the great enrichment and the cultural change that we experienced in the last 200 years and the cultural change that we are facing today. I hope that we can enjoy your talk here with us tonight. Deirdre doesn't need any presentation, but anyway, Deirdre McCloskey is a Emerita Distinguished Professor of Economics, History, English, Communication, you know a lot of things, in the University of Illinois at Chicago. She wrote more than 15 books, and his last 3 books are this one, those here, and this is the last one about the was virtues, equality, and dignity. And so we propose for the topic of our event now, los fundamentos del progreso. An explanation of why occurs this great enrichment and what is your vision about this topic today. So thank you, Deirdre, very much.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here. I'm going to speak in English because I don't know Spanish. I have a Spanish joke, though, that I must tell you that I made up. I'm going to sell it to the TV stations. Here it goes. Someone who knows 3 languages is trilingual. Someone who knows 2 is bilingual. Someone who knows 1 is una gringa. And I'm afraid that's me. So, by the way, I have a speech defect. I stutter and occasionally I will, so it's okay. I'm not going to break down crying or anything. Let me give a brief view of the conclusion I came to in these 3 books. The first one came out in 2006, called The Bourgeois Virtues. In 2010, Bourgeois Dignity, Why Economics Can't Explain the Modern World. I'm an economist, but yet I'm saying no. And then the third one is called Bourgeois Equality, Why Ideas, Not Capital or Institutions, Enriched the World. And the titles suggest, as they should, the general tendency of the series. But I discovered my theme as I wrote, which I think is a good thing. I had a somewhat open mind, and I started the first book with the idea of defending the middle class, the bourgeoisie, the merchants and manufacturers and lawyers and so forth, and ended with what I think is the correct explanation, the only correct explanation of how we got such amazing things as the view from this window. How we got the modern world. How we became rich and free and reasonably virtuous as well. Indeed, the first book, called The Bourgeois Virtues, Ethics for an Age of Commerce, asked the question, is it corrupting to be in business? capitalism, as it's often called, I think a very foolish word, is that, does that make you lose your immortal soul? If the answer was yes, I would have stopped. I would have abandoned economics. I would have gone and become a priest or something. None, I think, more appropriately. But I concluded that it was not corrupting, not necessarily corrupting. No more corrupting than being administrator in a socialist state, or officer in the army, or priest for that matter. So, it's not corrupting, but it's more. As I wrote, I discovered that the usual explanations that my colleagues in economics and economic history give of how we got rich don't really make a lot of sense. They don't have, I use an American expression, oomph. Oomph, you know, when you're pushing something, you go, "Ugh!" So that we call it oomph, the force to move the chair or something. Oomph. They don't have the quantitative force that they need to explain what happened. What happened? Well, an increase in income per head in Uruguay, in the United States, in Japan, in Finland, in Botswana, in lots of other places, by a factor of 30 since 1800. An increase in the ability of poor people, the poorest among us, to buy goods and services of 3,000%. When you ask people, if I were to do a survey here before I told you the truth, and I asked you what you thought, let me put the question this way. How much better off is the average Uruguayan or the poorest Uruguayan than her ancestors in 1800? You would probably answer, 100% better, maybe 200%. A factor of 2 or 3, right? That's probably what's in your head. Because that's, by actual survey, that's what people think. Maybe at the outside, 400%. But in fact, it's much, much larger. And if you don't learn anything else this evening, try to take home this amazing quantity, this amazing quantitative fact that we are 3,000% better off than our ancestors. It's not terribly hard to believe that if you start thinking through it. I mean, look, I have 2 artificial hips. Yeah? Well, come on. Our great-grandparents, if they got arthritis in their hips, as I did, my advice to young people is if you're going to get arthritis, make sure it's in your hips. Because it's very easy to fix. So I have 2 artificial hips, and here I am, walking along. That was impossible. Our great-grandparents, if they had arthritis in their hips, they ended up in a chair and they died. Child mortality, infant mortality, has fallen like a stone in the modern world. Even in still quite poor countries like Bangladesh, with the result that female fertility has fallen, family size has fallen, even in Bangladesh, and certainly in Uruguay and the United States. Food, you know, some of us, I count myself among us, are perhaps overfed. But our ancestors, my Irish and Norwegian ancestors, were often underfed and would actually starve. Some of my Irish cousins did in fact starve in the 1840s. I always point to glass, because glass is simply amazing. This glass is impossible before really the second half of the 20th century. You couldn't make glass like this. Look, watch, I'll go pound on it. If I had tried to do that for a little tiny piece of glass in 1800, I would have broken it, right? Now we can make doors out of glass. You lean against the glass automatically. Come on, a door of glass. And all around us, we have these miraculous innovations, not all of them chemical or mechanical or biological, some of them institutional, such as containerization. Containerization was an idea of a man named Norman McLean in 1956 in North Carolina. He was a trucker, he owned a trucking firm. He was a poor boy, so he hadn't been to university. And he said, suppose we make boxes of a standard dimension, corrugated so they're strong, so they can be piled on top of each other. Then we can send ships to China full of American tobacco or whatever we want and get stuff back. That's just an organizational change. It has nothing to do with science. Science is involved in the glass and in our electronic watches and so on, but not in a lot of the innovations. So there's this astonishing growth. And it's caused, evidently, obviously, I can say it before I say anything else, by ideas, human ideas. Human creativity obviously explains the chemist who is able to make glass the way it is, or the entrepreneur like McLean, who's able to see a way forward. Now, on the contrary, the usual explanations, which I deal with in the second book, which is Bourgeois Dignity, why economics can't explain the modern world. The usual explanations by my colleagues in economics and history are of two sorts. One is from my friends on the left, my Marxist friends. And I have lots of Marxist friends. I was a Marxist myself once. I was a socialist back in 1960. Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn and I were the same age, the three of us. In 1960, we all believed that the way forward was to overthrow capitalism. That's what I thought when I was a freshman, a first-year student at university. Jeremy Corbyn and Bernie Sanders haven't changed their ideas since I have. And you can draw whatever inference you want from that. In fact, that's a very, very common pattern in the 20th century. People starting on the left as revolutionaries and becoming liberals or conservatives. I'm a liberal, not a conservative, but I have friends who are conservatives too. This afternoon I wrote an article for National Review, which is a conservative magazine in the United States. I edited it. Look, so I moved. And the explanation I believed in 1960 for the riches of the modern world was exploitation. Yeah. Exploitation, say, of slaves in the United States. This has become a new passion of historians in the United States, historians of the United States, to claim that slavery was the reason America became rich. Now, there are problems with this particular argument and all these exploitation arguments. One of the main problems is that exploitation and slavery are very common. there was a slave trade in East Africa. The slave trade we're familiar with in the New World was from West Africa, but from East Africa, going up the coast and up to the slave markets of Cairo and Istanbul. But that didn't cause a great enrichment. That didn't cause a 3,000% increase in real income per head. Understand, we're correcting for inflation, of course. This is real stuff. And slave societies are very common. Classical Mediterranean obviously was a slave society. So is Africa itself, by the way, internally. And that didn't result in, if all you need to do is exploit a bunch of slaves and then you become rich, well, this is a really simple way to become rich. And what's also odd about it is the slaves themselves became rich. The descendants of the Africans who were forced to come to the New World are vastly better off than their ancestors back in Africa. The other line that I believed in 1960 was that, well, the English working class was exploited. That's the other way. This is Marx, the great master. Marx says the bosses, the capitalists, extract surplus value and then reinvest it and accumulate capital, and that explains the modern world. In fact, it's important to understand that Marx was in a way was a great admirer of what I call innovism. That's, I think, a better word for what happened in the last 2 centuries than capitalism, which is misleading. But all right, he admired it because socialism would be plucked as a fruit from the socialization of the means of production that he believed would happen in an innovating society. But that argument that the surplus value and reinvestment explains it is no more persuasive than the slavery one, or the one that was very popular in Latin America. Raul Prebisch and company spoke of dependency. And Europe was rich because Latin America was poor. Imperialism is another one. England is rich because it exploited India. None of these make much sense because there's too little exploitation going on. And exploitation anyway is not the point, it's innovation that's the point. It's new ideas that matter, not taking money from one person and giving it to another. Indeed, that's the underlying problem with the modern word is about inequality. I'm not in favor of inequality, of course, if it's caused by people stealing from each other. I want those people to be stopped. No more, that's stealing. But if the inequality is caused by innovation, if you're Norman MacLean and you make a lot of money because you've thought up for the benefit of the whole society containerization, I have no problem with that. I don't envy the rich. And indeed, I don't think we should. I think envy is a very bad principle for economic or social policy. Because I can envy everyone in this room about something. And you can, maybe you can envy me, I don't know why you would, but I can find something to envy about each one of you. In which case, achieving equality, what? There are many people in this room who are more intelligent than I am. Let's see, what should we do? Ah, yes. Pound nails into your head until you're as stupid as I am. That will achieve equality. So it's not equality we want. It's the diversity of gifts, as St. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 13. It's the the diversity of gifts that is our gift, the variety of people with all their creative abilities. That's what made the modern world. Now that's the left. So I'm saying, and I'm not just dismissing the left. I told you I have friends on the left, and I'm patiently considering their arguments and showing that they don't work, that they can't explain a factor of 30. I don't know if you're gonna, and anyway, if you're gonna steal from people, if you're Britain, you decided, look, the way we're gonna get rich is by stealing from someone. Now let's see, who should we steal from? Poor people, Indians. Now that's a bad business plan. If you're gonna steal from someone, steal from rich people, steal from the French. Come on, conquer France. They tried actually in the 14th century, it didn't work out so well. So stealing, exploitation, that can't do it. So that's on the left. On the right, though, the explanations are just as unpersuasive. On the right, the argument is, aha, you invest, virtuous right-wing people save because they're rich. And that's good. They save, and then that increases the capital stock, and we build buildings like this. That's what makes us rich. The capital stock. This is wrong too. And the reason it's wrong is that investing in capital without innovation, without a new idea, is fruitless. Well, not entirely fruitless. If they built still another building like this right next door, I guess they'd get some use out of it. But if they build a third building and a fourth and a fifth, you see the tendency. There's going to be diminishing returns. Unless it's a good idea, a clever new way of doing things to build another building. So you see, so even the conservative view that the rich need to be protected because they supply the capital that makes us all rich, that doesn't work either. I'm not in favor of expropriating people. I don't go for it. I'm a liberal. I believe in private property and so on. And I don't want to hang the bankers from the lampposts. Once I did, but now I'm over that. Just in time to save the bankers. But that's not the heart of innovism. I've had arguments with my friends on the right, and they say, oh no, but capitalism must depend on capital, because after all it's called capitalism. And I say, no, that's what's wrong with the word. Sheer pouring of capital into a country doesn't make it rich. You can persuade the Chinese to invest in Uruguay, I urge you to do it, but that's not going to make you rich. What's going to make you rich is new ideas, good ideas for projects within your country. And you see, the scale's very important. If it's a factor of 30, we're not talking about little investments, let's put another building here. We're talking about big changes in how an economy works. They've got to be democratic. It's got to affect the whole society. It can't be just a few bright people. It's got to be that the whole society agrees with innovism. And that's what explains the modern world. My claim is that it's the coming in the 18th century, first in northwestern Europe, in Holland, in England and Scotland, and the English colonies, of liberalism in the real sense. Not the way it's used in Latin America, where it's often a synonym for conservative, and certainly not the way it's used in the United States, where it's a synonym for slow socialists. But the real meaning of the word, namely, a society and economy of free people. No more slaves. No more subordination. No more violent bosses. No violence of men over women. No violence of the state over citizens. No violence of the slave owners over the slave. Everyone's free. Everyone's equal. Equal in permission. Not in outcome, but in permission. It's really as simple as that. Permission. Allowing people to have a go, as the English say. They're very sports conscious, so have a go. You get a go, and I get a go, and we all have a go. That's their expression. It's not an American expression. So allowing people permission. And it's the idea that did it. Thomas Jefferson famously wrote, all men and women, dear, are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, this was a slave owner who wrote this, who didn't even free his wife's sister, with whom he had children, whom he also didn't free. That's how complicated Thomas Jefferson was. But the idea is characteristically 18th century. Voltaire, Mary Wollstonecraft, Tom Paine, the liberators. We speak of the people, the anti-colonials as liberators. But the more important ones were the ones who installed the liberal idea in the Western way of thinking. And this kept expanding. It kept going. First we liberated poor white men. Then we liberated slaves. Then we liberated women. Then colonial people. Then gays. Then transgendered people. Then Catholics. Then this, then that. Immigrants. We liberated and liberated and liberated. And from this, got an economy of free people willing to have a go. Willing to try out things. Massively. That's the point. Everyone in this room is a potential innovator. And if only you are allowed to innovate, or only you, that's not going to work. It's got to be everyone. And that's what happened. The extraordinary growth after 1800. At first, as I said, in northwestern Europe, and now in China and India, Botswana. Now, sub-Saharan Africa is starting to grow. I hope that Latin America will join in this rapid growth. Country I know and love, South Africa, I've taught there, has economic policies that make this kind of growth impossible. Very hard to start a business. The labor laws make it impossible to hire anyone, dangerous to hire anyone, and so you don't get this economic growth that you do get in India and China. So that's my argument, and I'm going to stop here and allow us to have a conversation. Why did we get rich? Because we became free. That's why we became rich. The freer an economy is, the richer it will become. The more equal in substance it will become, in important goods, in the ability to go to school, the ability to have a roof over your head. The really unequal societies before 1800. When our ancestors, I don't see any descendants of the crowned heads of Europe here, no Habsburg chins, I don't see any. Our ancestors were all unspeakably poor and starving, actually starving. And our masters had palaces. And that was truly unequal. The modern world of innovism, is more equal and richer. Indeed, that's the title of a popular book of mine. These I wish they were popular, but they're not as popular as they should be. Although, by the way, all three are in audiobooks in English, alas, not in Spanish, but in English. In fact, the first one has been translated into Spanish by El Fondo. Sí, in Mexico. I have a book coming out in November, though, of a still more popular version. Actually, I learned today that it's also going to be in an audio book. It's called Why Liberalism Works. How real liberal ideas made the world more equal and richer for all. Thank you very much.
Deirdre, I want to ask you some questions
Go ahead.
before go to the public. You say in your books, and I want to go deeper in that idea, that institutions doesn't explain the modern world.
No, I don't.
But probably we have a lot of economics here in the public will say that the rule of law, the property rights, etc., works for a country. Why do you think that it's not that?
No, it is that. You certainly need the rule of law and property rights. I'm for it. I'm a liberal. But the trouble is that the rule of law and property rights are very common. For instance, in 1492, if you were going to bet and you knew that there was going to be a great enrichment, you would have bet on China. Because China in 1492 had the best laws, the best tax system, the best enforcement of property rights, the best ships, the best technology, the best science. And also probably, at that time, the best poetry. This was China in 1492. Yet it didn't have liberalism. It didn't have this conviction, this burning conviction of equality. And so it didn't tip into the modern world. So yeah, you need property rights. Look, and you need peace. You're not going to get economic development in the middle of the Chaco War, right? If you're if you're in the middle of a war, you can't have economic growth of any sort, because ideas get stolen and people get stolen and killed. So yeah, but the problem is that there's a new orthodoxy in the World Bank. World Bank used to have what my friend, who's my friend? What's his name? My good friend, what's his name? No, this is Bill Easterly, argues that the World Bank for a long time had capital fundamentalism. That you pour capital into Ghana, build a lot of, I don't know, dams and roads and so on, and Ghana will of course become rich. Don't give Red China a single cent and it'll stay poor. Well, that didn't work out so well. Ghana remained poor and got even poorer under socialism, and the so-called Socialist Communist Party after 1978 saw the light and adopted innovism. So then what the World Bank said, oh well, it's not capital, it's institutions.
And a more rhetoric question. How is it so obvious for you and for me that liberal idea works and is the cause of the enrichment, liberty and dignity, as you say in your books? It's not so obvious for the people, and we have presidents, populists, nationalists, and
well,
even it's difficult for a majority in, I think, in almost any country to adopt real liberal ideas?
It is. It's very hard. In my own country, we once were a liberal country, and we've been slowly adopting socialism. Look, if you're spending, as the American government does, all levels, state, local, and federal, 35% of national income, you're 35% of the way to socialism. Communism, full socialism. If Henry Kissinger, who's a very amusing man, although I don't like his policies too much, Henry Kissinger said, in France, the share is not 35, it's 55%. 55% of French national income is spent through the government. And he said about that, France is the only successful communist country. Okay. But it's 55% socialist. Because what you mean by socialism is collective action in aid of sometimes noble purposes, I admit, but sometimes not so noble. But anyway, collective action, not voluntary, private action. So why is it hard to get people to believe this? Well, because we come from families where we were children and it was safe and comfortable. And lots of people want to stay as children. They don't want to be free adults. It's frightening to be a free adult. You have to take care of yourself. So we should be teaching our children and our young adults, or so many of our adults, to want to be free.
In your third book, you speak about the role of intellectuals and the clergy against liberal ideas. What there are so much intellectual against the liberal ideas?
Well, that's a hard one. I mean, I was one of these intellectuals. I was a Marxist. I wasn't a Communist Party member, but I was a Marxist. But I was, I must say, a very unscholarly Marxist. I've read half of the Communist Manifesto. I reckon I was a Marxist. I was a folk singer. This is back in the 60s. I was kind of a Joan Baez Marxist, singing the labor song, Los Cuatros Generales. Why are the intellectuals so hostile to liberalism? I find this very hard to understand. Some people have said, oh, well, it's because they're paid by liberal institutions, but that's not true. They're paid by newspapers and TV and film companies, and yet they're hostile to the very system that has made their existence possible. So I'm puzzled by that. If anyone has an idea, I'd like to hear it.
Thank you. We have any question in the public?
I'm sure we do. It doesn't have to be a question, it can also be an attack.
Vamos si se escucha.
Can you hear me? Can you hear it? Can he be heard? Does he need to? Why don't you give him the microphone? Because otherwise, I have a big voice and he has a small one. That's unfair. Thank you, dear.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I got two questions. First
Go
of all,
ahead.
what do you think about social democracy in general?
Let me answer that. And then we can go on to the second. It's the social part that's the problem. I'm in favor of democracy. I'm a Democrat. I believe in the people. I believe you can't fool all of the people all of the time, although Donald Trump argues to the contrary. As Churchill, Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst system except for all those others that have been tried from time to time. And that's about how I feel about it. But the social part is socialism. And I'm not saying that it's, Soviet-style communism or something, but it is socialism. And it keeps creeping up. It keeps getting bigger. And I say, stop. Let's go back to an economy in which the poor are taken care of. I'm a Christian liberal. I believe you have an obligation to the poor or the handicapped. I want to help people, but I want people who can take care of themselves to take care of themselves. I don't want us to get on the dole. Now here's the trouble. I'm in a very awkward position because I'm old. So in the United States, I'm on Medicare, which is the free health service for old people in the United States. Old people vote, which is why it happened. I have these hip replacements, cost me no money. So, I'm kind of in a false position. Here I am complaining about such things, and yet I get the benefit. So anyway, what's number two?
Number two is closely related. I basically agree with most of what you said. Also, I think that
buy the books.
Yeah, I got it. The data regarding how we live better than ever are also a fact.
Yeah.
But I also think that the data also shows that some countries like Denmark, like the Norwegians,
Are happier.
are not just happier, but I also think most people live better, and they have social democracy. So
Yeah.
how would you
Well,
argue against that?
I don't argue strongly against it. I've lived in Sweden, I've taught in Sweden, and I like Sweden. And the Swedish or the Danish government, and Norwegian for that matter, my ancestors, I'm willing to give them more money to do stuff, right? Those Scandinavians. But I'm also willing to give Minnesota, the state of Minnesota, more money, because that's where all the Swedes and Norwegians went. And they have honest government, and that's okay, if it's an honest, but I made a calculation. What percentage of the world is governed by honest governments like that? And it's 10%. 90% of the population of the world is governed by governments like the Italian government, which every Italian knows. They call it governo ladro. And, everyone knows that it's corrupt and stupid and does crazy things. And if you think that's nice, try China and its insane policy of building high-speed rail all over the country, in a country whose income is half that of Uruguay per head. So, let's see, I've kind of lost track of the argument. I don't think that government's the good way to go. We have to have a government. I'm not an anarchist, although I view them with sisterly affection. But I want us to have a competent, small government. And indeed, it's a big exaggeration to think that the Danish social system, the safety net, is much bigger than it is even in the United States. People don't know this, but the fact is that in most states of the United States, and there's a good deal of variation, the safety net is pretty good in the United States. I have friends who are very poor, they're in my church. They don't have any problem getting medical care. When they get sick, they go to the public hospital, which is an excellent public hospital. So let's not get too excited about the Scandinavian model. Most countries are not Scandinavia, let's start with that. And in any case, other countries have safety nets too. I just want the safety net to be targeted and sensible and to actually help people instead of making them into serfs. You're welcome. If you want a longer answer, go read 1,700 pages.
Another question?
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. It was very interesting. Going back on a similar line, but going to the United States, now that you're in an election cycle, you mentioned Bernie Sanders. You mentioned how he hasn't changed that idea since he had in the 60s. And the right usually tells everybody in the TV that he's going for the new socialist United States,
Yeah.
communist and all that. Do you think that he's being labeled too much? That is he really going for socialism, communism?
Yeah, sure. No, not communism. He doesn't want to be.
No, but socialism. Let's say socialism. But
Socialism.
his policy, for example, on the taxing the rich and the super rich.
Yeah.
Would you say that there is some issue going on there on that 1%?
No.
No issue.
But here's look. Here's the problem. For one thing, Bernie calls himself a socialist. He's not a member of the Democratic Party. So he makes, as we say in English, he makes no bones about it. He's a socialist, and he says so. He always has been. So he wants socialism. Now, as far as taxing the rich, we do tax the rich. The rich pay most of the taxes. That's actually the fact. As you know, I think, the rich do pay. Now, should they pay more? Well, maybe. But here's the danger. You don't want to obscure the signals that the price that profit sends. If you tax, I don't have any big problem with taxing Bill Gates or someone. And actually, Bill's giving away all his money, so that's okay. Or Warren Buffett recommends that we tax him more. He says quite correctly that Warren Buffett is a very rich man, one of the richest in the United States. He's an investor. He pays a lower percentage of his income in taxes than his secretary does. And he finds this obnoxious, and I kind of do too. But there are all kinds of problems with big taxes on the innovators. That's the danger. If you tax the innovators, it's not so much effort. That's not the issue. It's the signal. If Bill Gates, here's an easy example. Steve Jobs invents this very convenient object, okay? And others copy him. And the reason they copy him is that he made a ton of money on it. So the money, the profit, is sending a signal. When you open a hairdressing salon in your neighborhood and you make money, it signals, it's the economy's way, so to speak, of central planning. It's the economy's way of saying, do more of that. And then there's the other problem, which I'm sure you also understand, which is that the rich are very good at evading taxes. That's one of the reasons they're rich, to tell the truth. They can hire accountants and lawyers and put their money in Panama. They do it. So unless you want to go and rush into their house and seize them, you're not going to accomplish much. And indeed, if you expropriate them and take, I don't know, whatever you want, 90% of their income, are they going to show up next year? No. The old joke is, expropriate me once, shame on you. Expropriate me twice, shame on me. Right? And I've made calculations in the book. You got to read the 1,700 pages. I've made the calculations in the book that show that expropriating these big incomes doesn't help the poor very much. The big way to help the poor is to get a vital, growing economy. There is no reason why Uruguay couldn't be growing at 7% per year. The Indians are, and they've only partly liberalized. You liberalize your economy and it'll explode, and the poorest among you will be better off. Much better off. Not 1% better off, but 3,000% better off. So that's kind of the outline there. I mean, look, this isn't a knockdown argument that I've made. And I don't suppose you believe that your position is, completely perfect. So we'll have to talk more, but anyway, consider the possibility that this may be wrong.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for this wonderful talk.
Thank you. I'm glad you called it wonderful.
But could you elaborate a bit more on your skepticism about institutions?
Yeah.
Explanation for development, different in development?
Well, you know, I don't want us to fall into what I believed and was taught when I was an undergraduate in the 60s, which was, it's this cultural problem. People thought in the 60s that India could never develop because, you know, they're all Hindus. And if they're not Hindus, they're Muslims. I mean, come on. Right? That was the attitude. Or the Chinese. How can the Chinese develop? They're all, I don't know, Confucians. That was the argument. And I want to get away from this cultural characterization of my argument, because that's not it. Okay, now, so it's not culture, it's ideas, it's ideology. It's the approval of the economy, you all, everyone, for innovism is the key. And that's my problem with the neo-institutionalism. I have another book, which will be published by the University of Chicago Press, which is a thorough review of this issue of institutional change. Institutions now I think we'll all agree on this, a simple way of looking at it. Dropping institutions on a society or economy is not going to do much. Look, you want English common law. Aha, let's see. Let's give all the lawyers white wigs, right? Like they have in England. And that'll make for English common law. That's obviously stupid. But some of the proposals for institutional change are not much more sophisticated than that. I'm fond of saying that the black letter law, the institution for crossing the street at the corner with the light is the same in Berlin and in Rome. Doubtless. I haven't checked it actually, but feel free. It's probably the same. You must cross at the light. I mean at the corner, and you must follow what the street light says. In Berlin, if you try to cross against the light, old ladies my age with umbrellas come and attack you. Oh, that's terrible. Go back, go back. In Rome, if you do it, they say, yeah. And so there has to be, and I think you'll agree with this, there has to be a deep ethical foundation. Now that doesn't mean it's hopeless, because it hasn't been hopeless. Formerly very poor countries have in 2 or 3 generations become very rich. The most spectacular example is Hong Kong, but now it's becoming China in general, and India. So what really matters is this agreement to adopt liberalism. The agreement to approve of innovism. The agreement to not, as we say in English, cut down, or in Australia they said, cut down the tall poppies, equalize people. We're not going to do that. We're going to give everyone permission to marry who they want, to start a business when they want to. And if people agree to that, then they'll have fast economic growth. If they insist on the state doing everything, I'm in a hotel, a wonderful hotel, that's startlingly nice, but it's owned by the state. It's above a casino, which is entirely owned by the state. This I find bizarre. I don't know. So those are, I don't know, it's not so much here's what I'm saying, it's not so much institutions as ethics, rhetoric, ideology. That can change fast. That's not a satisfactory answer. You have to read my other book. You don't have to read them, you have to buy them. Yes. Who's next?
Okay. I do not know how much you know.
Is it on?
No, I don't think it is. Just a second, I have my colleague.
He's your technical assistant.
Exactly.
Ideas.
Ideas?
I don't know how much you know.
Hold it close like a rock musician.
Okay. I do not know how much you know about Uruguayan history.
Very little.
Okay. Let's say that 120 years ago,
Yeah.
or 140 years ago,
You were liberal.
Yes, and we, for, let's say, 4 decades,
Closer.
we were growing quite fast.
You were.
Some called us the California of South America.
Sure.
And by about 100 years ago, we started making our own welfare state, even though the term was not coined.
I know, I understand that. That much I've heard. That
Okay.
much I understand.
So,
Maybe kind of premature.
very premature, probably, but at that time, it seemed the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But we then messed it more and more
Yeah.
increasingly. And if at that time we were close to the GDP per capita of some of the leading countries,
Sure.
we are now about in a fifth or something like
Well, not that low. No, you're about half.
that. No.
Yeah, sure. Half of, say, Italy. No, maybe
No, that's not
we
the,
are 1/4 of the US, for instance.
1/4 of the U.S. But I'm
Yeah.
talking about other countries, say
okay.
Italy. You're maybe half. Anyway, it's not hopeless. It's not a terrible thing. But he's behind it. But it's the story of the Southern Cone of Argentina and here that you messed it up. You were once, it's Australia and New Zealand. You were equal to them, and now you aren't. Well, okay. What's the lesson to be drawn from this? You can get back to being very rich again. But you've got to stop. You've got to stop protectionism. You've got to stop making it too hard to open a business. You've got to get the state. You got to sell off your state assets. You got to privatize. That's what I believe. What's your?
My question was on that line, kind of.
Go ahead.
What possibilities of investment and growth do you see for Uruguay?
Well, it depends on ideas. I've been here for a day and a half. So now, since I don't speak Spanish at all, I'm an expert on Uruguay. And I'm an economist and I'm here to help you. And I can tell you what to invest in. Well, come on. Of course I can't. I once wrote a book called If You're So Smart, The Narrative of Economic Expertise. That's been translated into Spanish, actually. And so, look, innovations are unpredictable. That's a key point. Anyone who's lived long enough to have seen a few innovations, waves of innovations, knows that, who could have predicted that the personal computer would be the amazing device it is? Not to speak of the smartphone. This phone is smarter than I am. I just got an iPhone, and I'm completely puzzled. It's unpredictable. People who say, "Oh, our best days are over," Gordon at Northwestern says this. How would they know? People said the same thing in the 1940s about stagnationism. Oh, the sky is falling. Or, I know there will be driverless cars everywhere in 10 years. Well, how did you know that? My grandmother was born in the 1890s. She remembers the transition from horses to automobiles. But it was completely unpredictable. Henry Ford's idea that everyone should have a car was not the original idea. It was a plaything of the rich. And yet pretty soon everyone had cars. So we can't predict, but we've got to allow. We can't predict, but we've got to permit. And the problem with the other model, which you have here in this country very vibrantly, statism, that the state will decide, the government will decide, is that the government's no smarter than we are. I mean, you know, many people here work for the government. I don't mean to insult you, but I take it you agree that you're not the greatest genius. You're not, as Donald Trump calls himself, a stable genius. You're not as smart as Donald Trump. I mean, who is? And so putting the state in the position of being the entrepreneur, as a terrible book by a woman named Matsukato says, is local. It's insane. It's not that the states are bad and we got to kill all instead of hanging the bankers, we'll hang the tax gatherers. No, it's just that we can't, our economy is unpredictable. Let people have a go. Let them try things out. If they fail, they pay. Whereas if it's the state, it's able to go on forever with a bad investment. Thank you.
The expressions and the ideas you share with us. But I want to see if you can relate your ideas to the ideas that 100 years before Joseph Schumpeter taught us. I think there is a lot of relation.
Yeah, there is. I have an essay on Schumpeter, which is available on my website. And I admire Schumpeter. The essay is somewhat critical of him, but the basic idea that entrepreneurship is the heart of the economy is what I believe. But there's a problem with his social theory. He didn't quite understand that he was too much of a Marxist. He was a great admirer of Marx. And he didn't quite understand that ideas are autonomous. He was not a Gramscian. I'm a Gramscian. I follow Antonio Gramsci, the great communist Italian theorist in the 30s. I'm not a communist, but I follow this guy. And he pointed out that it's not true, as classical Marxism says, that ideas are just caused by your material conditions. Ideas have their own effect. And I keep getting on and off this thing, I should probably stay up here. So he didn't get, he thought that socialism was inevitable, that entrepreneurial capitalism was doomed. Lots of people in 1942 did. And he was wrong. And the reason he was wrong is that there was a rebirth of a liberal idea after the war in many countries. Social democracy as well also grew. But there were lots of parts of these economies which were allowed, where people were allowed to be entrepreneurial. So I'm a Schumpeterian in a lot of ways. Think of me as the modern Schumpeter. Thank you.
Hello, Deirdre. My question to you is regarding your views on China right now, their situation. They are said to be the biggest economy in 10 or 15 years.
Fine with me.
They have opened in some ways their economy, and that explains their growth. But do you think the growth of China can be capped because due to the lack of liberalism on their social and human ways?
I'm not quite sure what the end of the question was. I think that China grows in its liberal parts, in its state enterprises, and in the crazy projects the Communist Party wants to do, the glorious projects like this railway that they want to build between China and Europe. Those are mistakes, and they're dragging down Chinese income. But they've got such a vital, voluntary part of their economy. They've had it since '78, and it's got to be more and more in the '80s, and especially the '90s. But they had this amazing economic growth. Not any more amazing than Hong Kong, which was in a way their model. But I didn't catch the last part of your question. Could you ask it again?
Do you think that for economical growth to reach its full potential, it should also be accompanied by social and human freedoms?
Well, that's yes, in brief. I think China has the problem that it's riding the back of a tiger. And I don't mean China. The Chinese Communist Party, which is all of politics in China, there's no competitor. Every state agency is run by the Communist Party. It's a totalitarian country, and it's becoming worse that way. Xi is a very dangerous and bad man, and extremely illiberal. And if they keep it up, the Chinese Communist Party is the old proverb, riding on the back of the tiger. As long as you're riding the tiger, everything's fine. What happens when you fall off the tiger? The tiger eats you. So I'm terribly afraid that China will have a falling off and a revolution, and the Chinese will be in terrible shape. I'm very afraid of that. Whereas India, I'm much more optimistic about. Because India, crazy as it is already a democracy. And so it's combining personal freedoms. You know, there's Hindu nationalism, be careful, but it's got a basic democratic framework, which I think is vigorous. So I can't be sure. Well, think of 1984, George Orwell's novel. The last scene, the villain, the agent of the state, says to, what's his name, the hero?
Wilson Smith.
Yeah, with Wilson Smith, he says, "My vision is of humanity with a boot on its neck forever." That's the statist view. That's the extreme statist view. A boot on its neck forever. Now, the Chinese Communist Party is trying to do that. It's the new aristocracy of China. And I pray that they fail.
Deirdre, I have the last question for you. What do you think?
Hold it closer, dear. You gotta think rock music, you know?
The last question.
Closer.
What do you think that we can do, what should we do to advance these ideas of liberty? What's the best thing that we can do?
The best thing to do is to talk to the artists, the movie makers, the musicians, the rock musicians, the popular culture people, the journalists, of course, and try to persuade them to share this vision of a free society. A society where everyone is free and no one is a child. Now, children we got to take care of. Handicapped people, we got to give the poor a hand up. But we don't have to make everyone into a child. We need an economy of adults. And I think we can persuade young people who want to be adults. I think we can persuade some of the artists, some of the intellectuals. And then they'll write the books and write the rock lyrics that recommend freedom.
So you are a Gramscian.
I'm a Gramscian. Thank you very much.